Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest, Fatima Goss Graves. Fatima, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have the president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center on the program. You're also a co-founder of the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund.
That's right.
So I definitely want to talk about that. You're an advisor to the American Law Institute project on sexual and gender-based misconduct on campus. And with the changes in the current administration and issues related to that, very much want to talk to you about that as well. And also, I've been involved in higher education at different levels. So I've followed Title IX and what the federal government was doing under the Obama administration, now under the Trump administration, very closely. So I'm really interested in your thoughts about that. But tell me about the Law Center.
Sure. We were founded 47 years ago, but I will confess that I've only been president 2 of those years. And our work is really an effort to expand opportunities for women and girls. We think about the law in its broadest sense. We bring cases in the courts. We fight for new policies at the federal and state and local levels. And we work to move our culture and to explain what legal rights there are and what actually needs to be in place.
So certainly this administration has kind of taken a different direction than any of the past or recent past administrations. What are the special challenges that are presented by this administration in terms of your work?
This is an extraordinary time. We're an organization, we work on health and reproductive rights, we work on workplace justice, education access, anti-poverty programs, and every single one of those things are under threat right now. Rights have been rolled back, programs have been gutted or limited, and so we're having to dig deep and use all of our tools, put our legal hats on, and sometimes even file lawsuits.
So when it comes to reproductive rights, certainly there's been a huge movement by this administration and by its supporters to restrict or eliminate abortion rights. How do you take on that challenge?
Well, the only good news about what's happening right now with reproductive rights is that they're clear on what their agenda is, and that is ending abortion access in this country. And so we no longer are debating whether or not that's what's really at stake. That is absolutely what's at stake in contraception too. And so it has meant that we have had to file lawsuits around their contraception rule, around their rule that would make it possible for people to refuse care. And it also has meant that we are in this ongoing battle at the federal level and in the states to protect this basic legal right to abortion.
Is it possible that advancements in medical science are going to make this moot where a woman can take a pill, which is, possible today, but get to the point where it's so effective that there's over-the-counter opportunities for anyone without age restriction to take a pill the day after and then essentially not become pregnant?
So there are lots of reasons why people need abortion care and why people need abortion care at different points in their pregnancy. I actually think the challenge that we have is we have told too few of the stories of why people need this health care. 1 in 3 women have an abortion. So someone has had one, and there are lots of reasons. But what we are facing right now is not just an attack on abortion. They're even taking efforts to punish women and adding criminal penalties. So we're really in a new phase of the trouble that has been brewing for a long time.
There also has been legislation regarding restricting abortions related to genetic defects. In some cases, voters support these measures. Other cases, they don't. What's your take on what are voters thinking when they support those kinds of restrictions?
So Roe versus Wade has been around a long time, and 70% of people support the right to safe and legal abortion. When people actually learn about the stories that make up the reasons why people have abortion, they grow empathy. They understand. What they don't understand is sort of the rhetoric that we are facing. And I actually think one of our cultural cures right now is telling more stories. And I've been so grateful to the many people who've come out, who've explained their situation. And when you are going through something like this, it is more and more clear that the only people who need to be in that decision is probably you and your medical provider. You don't need politicians who are not medical providers making these decisions. The good news is that even though there are some states in the South and the Midwest where we have seen really cruel efforts to restrict abortion access, at the same time we're seeing some states name that this is a core constitutional right. It is core to equality and dignity and personal liberty. And so some states are actually improving access.
And we mentioned campus, your work in terms of what's happening on college campuses. Tell me your take on what the Trump administration has done to change the most recent set of rules adopted under the Obama administration and what the implications are.
We're actually in the most vibrant cultural moment around harassment and violence that we've seen in a generation, with Tarana Burke's Me Too movement going viral. And at the same time, you have Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education trying to roll back rights for survivors in colleges and in K-12 schools. So there's this giant disconnect culturally from where people are and what this administration is trying to do. They're trying to make it harder to report. They're trying to make it so that if you're off campus, and you were assaulted on campus, that you can't report that conduct. More than 90% of sexual assaults that happen in college happen off campus.
Can't report it to the
college or university, that the university wouldn't be able to receive those reports. It's basically the university throwing up its hands and telling universities they can throw up their hands and not be responsible for the conduct that occurs. That's the opposite of what you want to happen right now. What you want to happen right now is for institutions to take responsibility and create a culture that addresses harassment and violence.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
So two things. I mean, one is how do we address the conditions so that those violations don't happen in the first place? I'd be really interested in your take there. And then secondly, I mean, one of the things that I've seen, I used to be a trustee of a university, so these kind of issues are ones I've had to look at. One of the things that occurs to me is if universities aren't as engaged in terms of judicial processes, in terms of complaints, following through on complaints within the university system, how can we get law enforcement authorities more involved, where you have people who are accustomed to investigating these kinds of crimes, they have expertise in that. You have district attorneys, offices, many of whom have their own internal groups that are focused on sexual assault in particular, and really make this a much more serious crime on campus and off campus than it seems to be.
Well, so there's a couple questions in there. The first thing that I think around culturally what schools can be doing is there have been a lot of lessons learned over the last, I'd say, 10 years around trainings and education on things like healthy relationships, consent, on what it means to be a bystander and a friend. I'd like to see those sorts of trainings happen much earlier than college, right? Most people who experience sexual assault, they actually experience it in their first couple of months in college. And so you really would like for a lot of that information to happen in high school and middle school. But colleges, I think, are taking important steps on that front. And I'm inspired by some of the work that they're doing together with their students. You know, there's this myth that if colleges fulfill their obligation to ensure that people can go to school free of sex discrimination, including harassment and violence, that they can't also use the criminal justice system. There's nothing to say that they can't. In fact, many people do. Some people don't, right? And I believe firmly and deeply whether and how to report an assault really needs to lie with the survivor. And we certainly wouldn't want to force people to go to the criminal justice system and only the criminal justice system. There's lots of reasons why people don't want to. Sometimes they don't want criminal penalties to happen to the person who engaged in that conduct. Sometimes what happened is a violation of school rules, but actually not a crime. Or sometimes people do want to use both systems. And the thing that their school can do, make sure that they're not living in the same dorm, in the same classrooms, make sure that if they've missed time out of school, that stuff is corrected, address a cultural problem going forward. That's actually not the business of law enforcement. Law enforcement is totally ill-equipped to do that, but schools are.
But schools can still do that under the new rules. They can still provide those kinds of assurances, those kinds of protections. They can provide
Well,
those.
the challenge is you have to actually be able to receive a complaint and a concern, and they have defined harassment so narrowly, and they have defined it so narrowly not even to include most of the harassment and violence that actually occurs in college settings, that it allows universities off the hook in ways that, ironically, universities don't want. This is a situation where people who supported student survivors lined up actually together with universities and school board associations and counselors and therapists. There was sort of a wall of people all saying to the Department of Education and to Betsy DeVos, you've got it very wrong. I mean, there have not been a lot of times where I've aligned myself with such an unusual set of folks. But what you realized is they took this extreme measure that didn't actually respond to the cultural moment that we found ourselves in. And you wouldn't want to be in a situation, and I think what universities were saying is they don't want to be in a situation where people are not coming forward because they think nothing important is going to happen, not coming forward because they think they're going to be forced into a criminal justice system that doesn't always do right by survivors, or not coming forward because you've defined it so narrowly that the process is stacked against you. So, you know, they received over 100,000 comments, many of which were basically loud and with exclamation points saying, you got it wrong, fix this. I hope that they do fix it. There still is an opportunity for them to do right by it. But I also know that many of the things that are in those proposed rules violate Title IX on its face, and also the APA. And the National Women's Law Center has other tools to address that if they move forward.
So something tells me we're going to see at least one or more legal cases on this. I think, you know, just in terms of covering the subject matter, I think you just articulated a concern about really the effectiveness of the justice system and how victims, in many cases, hopefully a minority, but a significant number, go to the justice system, go to law enforcement, and don't get the treatment that they deserve, and don't get the justice that they deserve. And I think the criticism of having universities be able to make decisions where a perpetrator gets thrown out of school, for example, the criticism has been those processes are flawed too. So it seems to me that one of the things everybody should focus on is how do we have processes that certainly accomplish the goals of getting justice, but are fair to all the parties.
And the irony is that Title IX allows for fairness for everyone in ways that, in truth, you don't get in a lot of systems, right? Because at its heart is that there must be a process that is equitable and fair and prompt. And if that is the touchstone, then you can ensure that you do that and do it right. And one of the interesting things is there's this narrative that survivors don't care about processes that are fair. They care deeply about it. What you really want is universities putting processes in place that people have confidence in, that they trust, that they at least perceive to be fair. Otherwise, people won't use them, right? They just won't. And so there's work to do. I have no doubt that lots of schools were getting it wrong during the Obama years. I just believe that to be true because my clients have come in and told us the many ways that they have been failed by their schools. But this overreaction by the Department of Education, there were a lot of other things that they could have done. One of the things that they could have done is actually invest in technical assistance and support for schools who were unclear what to do and uncertain and might have needed more support in getting it right. So unfortunately, they took this disastrous of an approach, and we'll see what happens.
I think one of the perspectives is if you want a university, if you want a college to be able to act, what kind of actions can they take? And then based on the severity of those actions, what kind of process should you have? So if you have a university or a college taking action such as saying, hey, we're going to put you somewhere, put him somewhere different, or not allow contact, or the kind of things, measures you were talking about, it strikes me that it would not make any sense to prevent a higher education institution from having those kinds of abilities, and I assume they still do and still would. I think when it gets to more severe, where you're removing someone from school permanently, I think that then you're in an area where you want to make sure that that process is fair to the person who's accused.
Right, and the person who made the complaint.
Well, absolutely, that's a given. That's a given. But
Well, so that's the problem. It hasn't been a given, right?
Well, no, I'm saying
And so-
that goal is a given. I think the complaint about processes on campuses and being familiar with them myself and being familiar with administrators is that, bottom line, a lot of these people don't have the experience, don't have the expertise to essentially make sure the processes occur in a proper, in an appropriate, in a fair manner. I'm not saying that they have any agenda. They just don't have the experience and expertise that law enforcement people have, that prosecutors have. And so, to me, the issue really is if you're going to, for example, you're going to lower the standard of a decision from a criminal decision to one, where there's
So the
there's
standard
no
that applies in civil cases generally,
Right.
and including all civil rights cases, is called preponderance of the evidence.
Right.
Is it more likely than not that it's happened? It would be extraordinary, actually, to take sexual violence out and put it in its own class where there's a higher standard than, say, racial harassment and discrimination, disability harassment and discrimination. That's one of the reasons why the vast majority of schools have long, well before the Obama years, used the same standard that you apply in all civil settings. So one of the things that's interesting is that when you think about the work that schools are doing to really think about, what do I do with this problem? How do I deal with the range of conduct, including the most severe? And what are the consequences? What was happening in most schools is there was no conduct that they found severe enough to actually exclude someone from campus. So it was a very rare event that was the result. If you think of and compare it to what happens for employers who have to routinely investigate complaints of harassment and discrimination all the time, they don't set up many courtrooms, They investigate the harassment and discrimination complaint, come up with some sort of determination, and move from there. I think there's a lot to learn from the long work that employers have been doing versus for some schools it is newer work because they were burying their heads in the sand around the problem and didn't have real systems in place. Like I said, I think some schools probably get it wrong. I don't believe that they are all getting it right. I think they probably get it wrong.
And I think that's probably what has motivated people behind those changes. I guess my perspective is a little different. As I said, I don't have quite the confidence in schools that you have. And I see these acts as very serious. And in my opinion, many more of them should go into the judicial system. And if
that's what a survivor wants, it will happen
Right.
to.
But-
Right? There's no rule that would ever stop someone.
No, but we
from
can.
also
But we can
going
have a
to
lot
that
more
process.
support. We can make sure men and women understand what their options are. We can have much better communication with law enforcement as part of that cultural training at the beginning.
And those things are actually required under the Clery Act. People are required to understand their rights. Schools are required to give that information. They're required to have these sharing agreements with law enforcement. So there are lots of schools that may not be living up to their obligations, but they should be giving their students the full range of information. What they shouldn't be doing is forcing someone into a system that they don't want to be in.
Well, I totally agree with that. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Fatima in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Fatima Goss Graves. So we just touched a little bit on workplace sexual abuse, sexual harassment. There's a real sense at times that people in the workplace really don't know what their rights are. Has that changed sufficiently, or where are we in that process?
So when Me Too went viral, there was a public awakening to the problem of harassment and violence. I'm not sure how many people actually knew what rights they had, and in some cases, unfortunately, what rights they don't have. We launched Time's Up Legal Defense Fund to ensure that anyone who wanted to could have access to an attorney and also access to people to help you tell your story. And since January 1st, we've heard from over 5,000 people.
Wow. And do you have the resources to help 5,000 people, or how?
No, there's no way, but we do have an attorney network of about 800 attorneys, and these are people who have signed up to provide free legal consultations and to answer questions and walk people through their rights. And sometimes just having that happen can be transformative for someone. It may be that they don't want to do anything in particular, but they want to know that what they have experienced is actually a problem and that there are things that they can do about it. Some people have moved forward, though, with attorneys and file claims, and we also do have resources to fund some of these suits. So we have been able to support over 100 cases.
That's fantastic. And is there a way you can publicize these cases so and not just women, but primarily women throughout the country, can see what expectations are, companies can see what happens if you don't handle these matters appropriately.
That's been an important part of the work, is the public storytelling, is the media work. And so we have been able to help people tell their stories. There's a woman, for example, named Jennifer Glover, who was a security guard at a nuclear facility and had experienced terrible harassment. She was able to get an attorney through the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. They did a story on her in the New York Times. She's written an op-ed. She's spoken at Congress about the need for legal reform. And her story is dramatically inspiring because this is someone who tried to complain, who experienced severe retaliation, and you might just give up at that point, right? You know, with your job on the line or threats of other harassment, you might just say, I'm not going for it. But in this moment, she is moving forward. She's trying to tell her story so that other people can learn and understand that it is okay for them to raise their hand too.
And when you look at just the demand, the potential demand, I would think, for this kind of support, these kind of services, I would think you're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe several million people. How do we get to the point where we can meet that need, or at least a much greater part of that need?
Well, part of what we're trying to do now is ensure that there is someone who has their back, right? So for people who want to come forward, including people who work in jobs where they may feel invisible, not seen, people working in restaurants and retail, domestic workers, we want to make sure that there are attorneys that can have their back. And at the same time, we want to be sure that people see this coming, that there is a movement that is armed in part with lawyers, that is driving change in institutions. So it is my long-term hope that institutions get out in front of this issue, that they don't wait for the lawsuit, they don't wait for the formal complaint or the story in the Washington Post.
Well, one of the really interesting issues, and I know we only have like 30 seconds left in this part, but is that the corporate perspective and how corporations see this, and certainly I would think they don't want to be involved in lawsuits. I mean, they want to be proactive. Have you seen, since Me Too has, kind of arisen, have you seen any change there? I mean, I already know, corporations were already on that path, but did it accelerate anything?
It has absolutely accelerated the work that corporations are doing. They understand it's a business imperative, but they also understand it's key to them retaining talent. They've been looking at the people they have lost, the opportunities that they have lost, the innovation they've lost because they haven't dealt with the culture and climate in their workplaces. I think we're going to make change.
All right. Well, that's the end of part one of our special two-part series with Fatima. Make sure you stay tuned for part two. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know.
make journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.